Hello there, my dear listener, and welcome to our special ASMR storytelling session. I'm delighted to have you join me today as we embark on a gentle journey through the life of someone quite remarkable. Tonight's story features Martha MacCallum, a woman whose experiences may resonate with your own inner strength. As you settle in and make yourself comfortable, allow my voice to guide you through this soothing narrative. The soft cadence of my words will help you relax, while the story unfolds like a gentle stream of consciousness. Let's begin our time together with open hearts and minds, ready to be transported to Martha's world. Martha MacCallum always possessed a quiet determination that set her apart from others, even as a young girl growing up in the coastal town of Driftwood Bay. Her chestnut hair framed a face that often wore a thoughtful expression, as if she were constantly processing the world around her. She had a way of listening that made people feel truly heard, a rare gift that drew others to her naturally. Martha's laughter came like summer rain, unexpected yet refreshing to everyone fortunate enough to hear it. Her home was a modest cottage overlooking the sea, where the rhythmic sounds of waves provided a constant soundtrack to her life. The cottage walls held memories of 3 generations, with weathered photographs telling stories of resilience through changing times. By her 30th birthday, Martha had established herself as the town's most beloved librarian, creating a sanctuary of knowledge for the community she cherished. The library, with its worn wooden floors and tall windows that welcomed dancing sunlight, became an extension of herself over the years. She knew every book by heart, could recommend the perfect story for any troubled soul, and kept special collections for those with particular interests. Children adored her animated storytelling sessions that brought characters vividly to life before their wide eyes. Martha found purpose in connecting people with words that might heal, inspire, or transport them from their everyday concerns. Her life had a comfortable predictability that she had grown to appreciate after years of uncertainty. Each morning began with the same ritual. Martha would wake before dawn, brew a cup of chamomile tea, and watch the sun rise over the horizon from her porch. These quiet moments allowed her to center herself before facing whatever the day might bring her way. She lived alone but never felt lonely, surrounded by books and the frequent visits from townsfolk who sought her company or advice. The gentle rhythm of small-town life suited Martha perfectly, allowing her to build meaningful connections while maintaining the solitude she sometimes needed. Her parents had passed years ago, leaving her the cottage and a collection of journals that documented their own life stories. These journals became Martha's most prized possessions, connecting her to her roots when the world seemed too vast or overwhelming. Yet beneath Martha's serene exterior lay a restlessness that had been growing steadily, like a tide slowly rising against the shore. Despite the fulfillment her work brought, she sometimes caught herself gazing at the horizon, wondering what adventures might await beyond the familiar boundaries of Driftwood Bay. The stories she read to others planted seeds of curiosity about places she had never seen and experiences she had never had. Martha had never traveled further than 50 miles from her birthplace, a fact that increasingly felt like a pebble in her shoe. At night, her dreams were filled with landscapes from books she had read, beckoning her towards something unknown. The safe harbor of routine that had once comforted her now sometimes felt like an anchor holding her in place. As the call of distant shores grew louder in her heart, the morning everything changed began like any other, with mist hovering over the bay and the scent of salt air drifting through Martha's open window. She arrived at the library earlier than usual, intending to sort through a donation of rare books that had arrived the previous afternoon. The heavy wooden door creaked, its familiar greeting as Martha stepped inside, breathing in the comforting scent of aged paper and lemon polish. She switched on the soft amber lamps that gave the space its characteristic warm glow, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. The box of donated books waited on her desk, alongside an envelope she didn't recognize. Martha's fingers traced the edges of the cream-colored paper before carefully opening it, revealing an elegant invitation that would soon challenge everything she thought she knew about herself. The invitation came from Alexander Reed, a renowned book collector who had apparently heard about Martha's exceptional knowledge of rare literature from a traveling professor. He was hosting an exclusive gathering of literary minds at his estate in the distant city of Meridian, and Martha's name had been suggested as someone whose expertise would be valuable. The event would last 2 weeks and feature discussions, workshops, and explorations of private collections rarely seen by the public eye. All expenses would be covered, but Martha would need to leave Driftwood Bay, something she hadn't done in over 15 years. Her heart quickened as she read the details, excitement mingling with apprehension in equal measure. The opportunity aligned perfectly with her secret yearnings, yet threatened the comfortable boundaries she had established around her life. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she placed the invitation on her desk, where it seemed to pulsate with possibility. Against the familiar wood surface, the morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room as Martha contemplated what accepting would mean. 2 weeks away from her library, from the rhythms of town life, from everything secure and known. She thought of the disappointed faces of children who would miss their story times, of elderly patrons who relied on her weekly deliveries of new reading materials. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest, making it difficult to breathe evenly. Yet alongside these concerns bloomed a sense of anticipation she couldn't ignore, a whisper that this might be the adventure her soul had been quietly craving. During her lunch break, Martha walked to her favorite spot on the cliffs overlooking the churning sea below. The wind tousled her hair as she closed her eyes, listening to the seagulls calling overhead and waves crashing against ancient rocks. This place had always helped her think clearly when facing important decisions in the past. Martha pulled the invitation from her pocket, reading it once more, as if the words might have changed since morning. The possibility of meeting others who shared her passion for literature, of seeing collections she had only read about in journals, filled her with unexpected longing. She realized with a sudden clarity that her fear wasn't about leaving home, but about returning, changed, in ways the town might not understand. Martha had always been their steady, reliable librarian. What if this experience transformed her into someone else entirely. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting golden light across the water, Martha made her decision with quiet resolve. She would accept Alexander Reed's invitation, would venture beyond the boundaries of Driftwood Bay for the first time in years. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her as she walked back toward town, her steps lighter than before. Martha would need to make arrangements for the library, pack suitable clothes for city life, and prepare herself mentally for the journey ahead. She imagined herself in elegant discussions among literary scholars, contributing insights from her years of dedicated reading and research. The image felt strange, yet oddly right, like trying on a dress that somehow fits perfectly despite never being worn before. Martha pushed open the door to her cottage, immediately sitting down to compose her acceptance letter with careful penmanship. Her journey was about to begin, though she could not possibly foresee all the ways it would transform her life. The week before her departure passed in a flurry of preparations that left Martha little time to second-guess her decision. She trained young Emily Henderson, a college student home for summer break, to handle basic library operations in her absence. The town council agreed to reduce opening hours slightly, but seemed supportive of Martha's opportunity. With each passing day, Martha felt her anticipation growing stronger, surprising herself with how eagerly she awaited this disruption to her carefully ordered life. She packed and repacked her suitcase multiple times, unsure what would be appropriate for such a gathering. The old leather luggage had belonged to her grandmother, who had once traveled extensively before settling in Driftwood Bay. Martha wondered if perhaps some adventurous spirit might have been passed down through generations, lying dormant until now. The night before her journey, Martha couldn't sleep, despite feeling exhausted from all the preparations. She stood at her bedroom window, gazing at the silver pathway created by moonlight on the dark water below. Questions raced through her mind about what awaited her in Meridian, about whether she would fit into this world of academic elite and wealthy collectors. What if her small town perspectives were dismissed, or worse, ridiculed by those with formal education? Martha pressed her palm against the cool glass, steadying herself with deep breaths. She reminded herself that books had been her greatest teachers, that her knowledge came from years of passionate study rather than university degrees. Still, doubt crept in like the fog that sometimes blanketed the bay, obscuring her view of what lay ahead. Dawn arrived with gentle persistence, pink light spreading across Martha's bedroom. As birds began their morning chorus outside, she had finally fallen asleep just hours before, but woke feeling surprisingly refreshed, as if her body understood the importance of the day, even if her mind remained anxious. Martha, dressed carefully in a navy blue dress she rarely wore, applied light makeup and secured her hair in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. The woman in the mirror looked familiar, yet somehow different, more purposeful perhaps, or simply more alive with anticipation. She touched the silver pendant around her neck, a gift from her mother that had always brought comfort during difficult moments. Today, it would accompany her into the unknown, a talisman connecting past to future. The taxi arrived, precisely at 8 o'clock, driven by Mr. Jenkins, who had known Martha since she was a child reading books under trees. He insisted on carrying her luggage, despite his advancing age, making small talk about the weather to ease the tension he sensed in her. As they drove through town toward the train station, Martha gazed out at familiar storefronts and landmarks, committing them to memory, as if seeing them for the first time. The library stood solid and dependable as always, its stone facade weathered by decades of coastal storms. Would it feel different when she returned? Would she herself feel different after experiencing life beyond these streets? The questions lingered unanswered as Driftwood Bay gradually receded in the distance, and Martha MacCallum took her first steps toward an unexpected chapter in her carefully written life story. The train journey stretched nearly 6 hours, carrying Martha further from home than she had been in years. The rhythmic clickety-clack beneath her became almost meditative as countryside gave way to increasingly urban landscapes. Martha watched fields transform into suburbs, then finally into the sprawling cityscape of Meridian with its gleaming skyscrapers and historic architecture existing in surprising harmony. Her heart raced as the train slowed, approaching the massive central station where someone would be waiting to transport her to Reed Estate. Fellow passengers gathered their belongings with practiced efficiency, while Martha moved more deliberately, suddenly aware of her outsider status in this fast-paced environment. She clutched her handbag closer, containing the precious invitation that had set everything in motion. The station buzzed with energy that immediately overwhelmed Martha's senses, announcements echoing through the cavernous space, hundreds of people rushing in different directions, the mingled scents of coffee shops and perfume and humanity. She stood momentarily frozen, unsure where to go amid the controlled chaos. Then she spotted a dignified man in uniform, holding a sign with her name carefully printed. Relief washed over her as she approached him with a tentative smile. "Miss MacCallum?" he inquired with a formal yet kind tone. When she nodded, he introduced himself as Edward, Mr. Reed's personal driver, and offered to take her luggage. Martha followed him through the crowded station, feeling simultaneously invisible among the masses and conspicuous in her small-town attire. Edward led Martha to a sleek black car waiting outside, opening the door with practiced precision before storing her luggage in the trunk. The leather seats felt cool against her skin as she settled in, grateful for the sudden quiet after the station's cacophony. Through the window, Meridian revealed itself in layers. Historic buildings alongside modern marvels, tree-lined avenues giving way to busy commercial districts. Martha had read about these landmarks, but seeing them physically brought an unexpected emotional response, a mixture of wonder and intimidation. Edward occasionally pointed out sites of interest during their drive, but mostly allowed Martha space to absorb her surroundings. After 40 minutes that felt both eternal and fleeting, they turned onto a private road bordered by ancient oak trees, approaching the legendary Reed Estate that few outsiders ever had the privilege to visit. The first glimpse of the estate took Martha's breath away, a magnificent stone mansion nestled among perfectly manicured gardens, with ivy climbing portions of the facade, as if nature were reclaiming small sections of the impressive structure. Fountains sent water arcing gracefully into the afternoon sunlight, creating ephemeral rainbows that appeared and vanished in moments. As Edward parked before the grand entrance, Martha felt a momentary panic, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in coming here. How could she, Martha MacCallum, from tiny Driftwood Bay, possibly belong in such surroundings? Before she could voice her doubts or request a return to the station, the massive wooden doors opened, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against warm light from within. Alexander Reed himself had come to welcome her, an honor Edward quietly informed her was rarely bestowed upon guests. "Ms. MacCallum," Alexander greeted warmly, extending his hand as she emerged from the car. "Your reputation precedes you. Welcome to Reed Estate." His voice carried the cultured tones of extensive education, yet lacked the condescension Martha had feared. Instead, genuine enthusiasm brightened his features as he guided her inside, explaining that the other guests would arrive throughout the afternoon. Martha found herself responding to his questions about her journey with increasing ease, her initial nervousness giving way to cautious excitement. The grand foyer opened into a series of elegant rooms, but it was the library that Alexander seemed most eager to show her. "I've been told you have quite the eye for rare editions," he remarked, leading her toward double doors at the hallway's end. "Perhaps you might help authenticate some recent acquisitions." When Alexander opened the library doors, Martha stopped mid-step, overwhelmed by what lay before her. 3 stories of books rose around a central reading area, with spiral staircases connecting different levels and rolling ladders attached to shelves that seemed to stretch endlessly. The scent of leather bindings and aged paper enveloped her like a familiar embrace. Yet the magnitude of the collection far exceeded anything she had ever encountered. Afternoon sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across ancient tomes and contemporary works arranged with meticulous care. "This is," Martha began, finding words inadequate to express her emotions. Alexander smiled knowingly, giving her space to absorb the magnificence surrounding them. "This is where you'll likely spend much of your time during the gathering," he explained. "Feel free to explore before dinner. Your expertise with early American literature will be especially valuable to our discussions tomorrow." As Alexander excused himself to greet newly arriving guests, Martha ventured deeper into the library, running her fingertips lightly along shelves containing volumes she had only read about in scholarly journals. First editions of Hemingway and Fitzgerald rested near leather-bound collections of Shakespeare and Milton. In a climate-controlled glass case, she discovered what appeared to be original manuscripts from authors long passed into literary legend. The wealth of knowledge surrounding her was both intimidating and thrilling, representative of the larger experience awaiting her over the coming weeks. Martha settled into a window seat overlooking the gardens, watching other guests arrive in vehicles similar to the one that had brought her. Scholars and collectors from around the world all gathering under one roof to share their passion for literature. For the first time since leaving Driftwood Bay, Martha felt a sense of rightness about her decision, a quiet confidence that perhaps she did belong here after all. A soft chime announced dinner would be served in 30 minutes, giving Martha time to freshen up in her assigned room. A young woman named Claire appeared to escort her upstairs, chatting amiably about the estate's history as they navigated ornate corridors. Martha's room proved as elegant as everything else she had seen. A four-poster bed with silk hangings, antique furniture arranged for both beauty and functionality, and fresh flowers scenting the air. A small balcony offered views of both the formal gardens and distant mountains beyond the estate's boundaries. After washing away travel weariness and changing into a more formal outfit for dinner, Martha stood before the mirror, barely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Something had shifted internally during her journey here. Spark had been ignited that she couldn't quite name, but could definitely feel spreading warmth through her chest. The grand dining room hummed with conversation when Martha entered, momentarily hesitating in the doorway as dozens of unfamiliar faces turned toward her. Alexander approached immediately, guiding her to a seat beside an elderly woman introduced as Dr. Eleanor Whitfield, former curator of rare manuscripts at a prestigious university. To Martha's other side sat Gabriel Chen, a young literature professor whose recent publication on forgotten female authors had caused considerable stir in academic circles. As wine was poured and appetizers served on fine china, Martha listened more than she spoke, absorbing discussions that ranged from authentication techniques to theoretical analyses of obscure texts. Gradually, she found her voice, offering insights about patterns she had observed in early American literature that caused Dr. Whitfield to regard her with new interest. "You've never taught at university level?" Dr. Whitfield asked after Martha had eloquently connected themes across three authors, most considered unrelated. When Martha explained her position as a small-town librarian, several nearby guests exchanged surprised glances rather than the dismissal she had feared. However, this revelation seemed to intrigue them further. Gabriel leaned closer, asking thoughtful questions about her self-directed research methods. "Sometimes formal education creates blind spots," he remarked. "Your fresh perspective might be exactly what this gathering needs." By dessert, Martha found herself engaged in lively debate about textual interpretation, her earlier anxieties forgotten as she connected with these strangers through their shared passion for literature. As guests dispersed throughout the mansion following dinner, Alexander approached Martha with a mysterious smile. "There's something special I'd like to show you," he said, leading her back toward the library. "Given your particular interests, I think you'll appreciate this more than most." They entered through a different door than before, accessing a smaller room off the main library that required a key code to enter. Climate control systems hummed quietly as lights automatically activated, revealing glass display cases containing what appeared to be extremely old documents. Martha's curiosity piqued as Alexander guided her to the central case, where a leather-bound journal rested on velvet cushioning. "This arrived last month from a private collection in Europe," he explained. "The authentication is proving challenging, but if genuine, it represents a significant historical discovery." Martha leaned closer, examining the journal through the glass. The handwriting appeared faded, but consistent with period techniques she recognized from her extensive reading. Alexander entered another code, opening the case, and with gloved hands carefully transferred the journal to a special viewing table with controlled lighting. "You may examine it," he offered, providing cotton gloves for Martha's use. Few people have touched these pages in centuries. With trembling fingers, Martha accepted this extraordinary privilege, carefully opening the journal to reveal entries dated 1692. The writer described events in Salem during the witch trials from a perspective Martha had never encountered in published accounts. If authentic, this journal offered revolutionary insights into one of America's darkest historical periods. For nearly 2 hours, Martha lost herself in careful examination of the journal, taking notes on linguistic patterns and historical references that might help determine authenticity. Alexander watched with evident satisfaction as she worked, occasionally offering context about the journal's acquisition, but mostly allowing her to draw independent conclusions. Eventually, Martha looked up with excitement she couldn't contain. These references to specific local customs aren't mentioned in any public accounts from the period, she explained. Either this is an extraordinarily well-researched forgery or... She hesitated, almost afraid to voice her conclusion. Or it's genuine, written by someone with intimate knowledge of both the community and the trials. Alexander nodded slowly, clearly pleased by her analysis. That's precisely the question our panel will discuss tomorrow. Your insights would be invaluable to the conversation. As Martha prepared for bed that night in her luxurious room, her mind raced with possibilities. The journal presented, if authentic, it could reshape historical understanding of events long documented primarily through court records and second-hand accounts. The responsibility of participating in such a discussion both thrilled and terrified her. Martha opened the balcony doors, breathing in night air scented with distant pine forests and nearby roses. Stars stretched across the sky in patterns identical to those visible from her cottage. Yet somehow, they seemed different, viewed from this unfamiliar location. She thought of Driftwood Bay, of her quiet library, and predictable routines, wondering how they would feel upon her return. Would they still fit? Or had this single day already begun transforming her in ways that would make her former life feel like a garment outgrown? Sleep came fitfully that night. Martha's dreams filled with images of ancient texts and scholarly debates, interspersed with familiar scenes from home. She woke before dawn, the habit of years not easily broken, even in these new surroundings. Rather than watching sunrise over the ocean, she witnessed morning light gradually illuminating manicured gardens and distant mountains from her balcony. The estate began stirring to life below, gardeners tending flower beds, kitchen staff receiving deliveries, preparations for another day of intellectual exploration. Martha dressed thoughtfully in clothes that balanced professionalism with comfort, knowing today would test her knowledge and confidence among peers who had dedicated entire careers to literary scholarship. As she pinned her hair back, she caught sight of her reflection once more, noticing something different in her eyes, a brightness that hadn't been there before, kindled by opportunity and challenge. The morning session convened in a wood-paneled conference room adjacent to the main library, where 25 experts gathered around an oval table. Alexander introduced the Salem Journal, explaining its provenance and the questions surrounding its authenticity. As discussion began, Martha initially remained quiet, absorbing different perspectives and methodologies. presented by the assembled scholars. Dr. Whitfield noticed her attentiveness, occasionally leaning closer to offer context about speakers or their previous work. When Gabriel Chen directly asked Martha's opinion about linguistic inconsistencies another expert had identified, she found herself responding with greater confidence than she had expected. "Those aren't necessarily inconsistencies," she explained, referencing specific regional language patterns documented in letters from the era. "They actually strengthen the case for authenticity, as a forger would likely adhere to more standardized forms." Her comment sparked intense debate that continued through lunch, with experts dividing into camps, supporting or questioning the journal's legitimacy. Martha found herself increasingly central to the discussion, drawing on years of independent research to offer perspectives that sometimes challenged conventional wisdom. By afternoon, Alexander was regularly directing questions toward her, clearly valuing her insights despite her lack of formal credentials. When the session concluded, several participants approached Martha with cards and contact information, expressing interest in her work and inviting correspondence. Gabriel walked with her into the gardens afterward, both needing fresh air after hours of intense concentration. "You've made quite an impression," he observed, genuine admiration in his voice. "Alexander wasn't exaggerating about your expertise." The following days established a rhythm that both challenged and fulfilled Martha in ways she hadn't experienced before. Mornings featured structured discussions about specific texts or authentication challenges. Afternoons allowed for independent research in the magnificent library, and evenings brought social gatherings where connections formed through shared intellectual passions. Martha gradually found her voice in this rarefied environment, discovering that her years of devotion to literature had prepared her well. Despite taking an unconventional path, she formed an unexpected friendship with Dr. Whitfield, whose initially intimidating demeanor concealed a warm personality and wicked sense of humor. Gabriel frequently sought her company during meals, their conversations ranging from academic topics to personal philosophies about literature's purpose in modern society. 1 week into her stay, Martha received an unexpected invitation to join Alexander and a select group for a special excursion the following day. "We'll be visiting private collections rarely opened to scholars," he explained during dinner. "Transportation leaves at 7 sharp." The prospect both excited and intimidated her, representing further acceptance into this world she had only observed from afar until now. That night, Martha wrote a lengthy email to Emily, checking on the library and sharing carefully edited highlights of her experience. She omitted mentions of the Salem Journal and private collections, focusing instead on the beautiful grounds and interesting people she had met. Reading over her message before sending, Martha realized how inadequate words seemed to capture her transformative experience. How could she possibly explain to anyone in Driftwood Bay what these days had meant to her? The excursion proved even more extraordinary than Martha had anticipated, taking their small group to 3 private estates housing literary treasures unavailable to the public. In a Renaissance-inspired villa, they examined original correspondence between literary giants of the 19th century. A modernist mansion contained draft manuscripts showing the evolution of novels now considered classics. The final location A converted monastery in the countryside housed religious texts dating back centuries, preserved with reverence and scientific precision. Throughout the day, Martha found herself included in discussions as a valued participant rather than an outsider. When she identified an annotation in a margin that had been previously overlooked, changing potential interpretation of the author's intent, Alexander exchanged glances with the collection's owner that communicated clear respect for her observation. Returning to Reed Estate that evening, Martha felt simultaneously exhausted and invigorated by all she had experienced. As the group dispersed to prepare for dinner, Alexander asked her to join him briefly in his study. The wood-paneled room contained carefully selected volumes that appeared frequently referenced, with comfortable leather chairs positioned near a fireplace. Despite the summer season, "You've impressed everyone here," Alexander said without preamble, gesturing for her to take a seat across from him. "Your insights regarding the Salem Journal, particularly." He paused, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. "I have a proposition that might interest you, though it would require significant changes to your current circumstances." Martha's heart quickened as Alexander outlined his proposal: a year-long position authenticating and cataloging recent acquisitions for his foundation, with accommodations provided on the estate grounds. The salary he mentioned casually exceeded her annual library income several times over. "Your perspective is precisely what we need," he explained. "Someone who approaches texts with both scholarly rigor and genuine passion." The opportunity would include travel to acquisition sites, collaboration with leading experts, and publication opportunities under the Foundation's prestigious imprint. "Take a few days to consider," Alexander concluded, apparently unaware that he had just offered Martha the chance to step fully into a world she had only dreamed about accessing. "We would, of course, make appropriate arrangements with your current employer if you accept." That night, Martha couldn't sleep. Despite exhaustion weighing her limbs, she paced her balcony under stars that no longer seemed the same as those above Driftwood Bay. Alexander's offer represented everything she had secretly longed for: recognition of her intellect, immersion in literary treasures, connection with minds that understood her deepest passions. Yet accepting would mean leaving behind the life she had carefully constructed, the community that depended on her presence at the library, the comfortable routines that had defined her existence for years. Martha thought of children waiting for story time, of elderly patrons who valued her weekly visits, of the small cottage filled with memories. Could she really walk away from everything familiar for this extraordinary opportunity? Or would declining mean betraying some essential part of herself that had always yearned for exactly this kind of adventure? As dawn approached without sleep finding her, Martha made a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. She would accept Alexander's offer, would step fully into this new world that called to her so powerfully. The library could hire a permanent replacement with Martha's recommendation. The cottage could be maintained by a caretaker during her absence. 1 year wasn't forever, she reasoned, though a quiet voice whispered that returning to her former life might prove impossible after experiencing these broader horizons. When Martha finally slept briefly before breakfast, her dreams were peaceful for the first time since arriving at Reed Estate, as if her subconscious approved the choice her conscious mind had agonized over for hours. The final days of the gathering passed in a blur of activity, panels and discussions, formal dinners and informal conversations lasting late into the night. Martha confirmed her acceptance of Alexander's position, signing preliminary paperwork that made the abstract suddenly, thrillingly concrete. She would return briefly to Driftwood Bay to make necessary arrangements before beginning her new role. The following month, news of her appointment spread quickly among attendees, generating congratulations and expressions of anticipation about future collaboration. Dr. Whitfield pulled her as the gathering concluded and guests departed for various destinations around the world. Martha stood on the mansion's front steps, watching cars disappear down the oak-lined driveway. Gabriel approached, his own departure scheduled for later that afternoon. "Will you miss Driftwood Bay?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his expression. Martha considered the question carefully before answering, wanting to be honest with both Gabriel and herself. "I'll miss certain aspects," she acknowledged, thinking of ocean views and familiar faces. "But I think perhaps I've been missing something else for much longer, without fully realizing it." Gabriel nodded, understanding, then surprised her by requesting permission to visit during his upcoming sabbatical. "I'm researching libraries as community anchors in small towns," he explained. "Your perspective bridging both worlds would be invaluable." The journey back to Driftwood Bay reversed Martha's earlier path, yet everything felt fundamentally different. Landscapes that had seemed foreign now appeared simply diverse. City crowds that had overwhelmed now represented exciting possibilities. As farmland gave way to coastal scenery, Martha's emotions became increasingly complex. The familiar silhouette of her hometown appeared on the horizon, unchanged yet somehow smaller than in her memory. Mr. Jenkins waited at the station as arranged, his friendly face lighting with pleasure at her return. "The whole town's been asking about you," he reported as they drove through streets that seemed both achingly familiar and strangely altered. "Emily's been doing fine with the library, but everyone says it's not the same without you there." Martha's cottage welcomed her with silent emptiness, dust motes dancing in sunlight streaming through windows closed for 2 weeks. She moved through rooms that held her history, touching objects that connected her to parents and grandparents long gone. Outside, waves continued their eternal conversation with the shore, indifferent to human concerns about belonging and becoming. Martha opened windows to release stale air, then walked to her porch, where the view remained as spectacular as always. Yet something had shifted in her relationship to this place that had defined her for so long. She still loved Driftwood Bay, still appreciated its beauty and community, but now understood with absolute clarity that it represented only one chapter in her story, not the entire narrative. The following weeks passed in purposeful preparation, meetings with town officials about her extended leave, training sessions with Emily, who would now become acting librarian, careful packing of belongings she would need for her year at Reed Estate. Martha was surprised by the community's supportive response to her opportunity. Though she recognized sadness beneath many congratulations, She arranged for a local handyman to check her cottage regularly, organized her financial affairs, and sorted through possessions accumulated over decades. Some evenings found her sitting among partially packed boxes, holding objects that carried emotional weight and deciding their fate. The process proved therapeutic, helping Martha separate what truly mattered from habits maintained simply through inertia or fear of change. On her final evening in Driftwood Bay, Martha hosted a small gathering at her cottage for those who had been most important in her life there. They shared stories and laughter as sunset painted the bay in shades of gold and crimson, creating memories to sustain connections that would now stretch across distance. After guests departed, Martha walked alone along the shoreline, listening to waves that had provided soundtrack to her entire existence. The water reflected moonlight in patterns both random and perfect, reminding her that beauty existed everywhere if one remained open to experiencing it. Tomorrow would bring departure and beginning, anxiety and exhilaration in equal measure. Martha breathed deeply of salt air, storing the sensation in memory without knowing when she might experience it again. Dawn arrived with gentle insistence, birds greeting the new day with songs that seemed particularly meaningful. Martha moved through her morning ritual one final time, tea on the porch, watching light spread across water that constantly changed yet remained fundamentally the same. Her luggage waited by the door, containing carefully selected items that would accompany her into this next chapter. When Mr. Jenkins arrived to drive her to the station, Martha locked her cottage without allowing herself to linger sentimentally at the threshold. The future beckoned with possibilities she had only recently allowed herself to imagine, and Martha MacCallum stepped toward it with courage, born from discovering that life's most meaningful adventures often begin when we allow ourselves to move beyond comfortable boundaries into the unknown that calls our name.